Hello, I'm Norbert Gleich, MD, Medical Director and Chief Scientist here at the Center for Human Reproduction. And we are visiting with you today with our visitor series. And it is my real pleasure to welcome a special friend of the Center for Human Reproduction today. Professor Zeev Shoham used to be the head of one of the best IVF units in Israel. He's a professor still today at Hadassah in Jerusalem. And he is here in New York, and we will be talking today about a very interesting subject, the implantation window. Zeev, it's a pleasure having you here.
Thank you very much for the invitation to be here today. And yes, it will be very interesting to discuss the implantation window and the whole process of implantation.
Most of the time, I like to disagree with whoever I'm discussing with, but I think we both agree that the emphasis on the implantation window at minimum is probably exaggerated, right?
Yes, I agree with you, and I would like to emphasize a few things about the implantation window. In general, I agree that there is an implantation window, but the question is, how wide is this implantation window? And just before I came in, I looked with 3 different AI algorithms, tried to define what they think about the implantation window, and I found that in 3 of them, the implantation window is a very narrow implantation window, which I disagree.
Okay, so I'm happy because I think here we can disagree maybe a little more because I don't believe that there is really an implantation window as such in principle, and I give you a very good example. How come that 2% of all pregnancies are ectopic pregnancies, not even having a uterus?
Exactly. And it's not only ectopic pregnancy, it's a tubal pregnancy or ovarian pregnancy, and then you can reach a full-term pregnancy when the blastocyst implant on the omentum.
Absolutely.
Which bring me to the idea that the uterus needed to grow up the embryo, but the implantation window or the time of implantation is very wide, and I would change it instead of implantation window to call it a receptive endometrium.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree, and I think this is one of those dogmas in medicine and in our specialty that needs to be revisited. It is pretty obvious that if 2% of all pregnancies don't even need a uterus to implant, at minimum, there is no requirement. But at maximum, it raises interesting questions about the future because it means maybe we will not need a uterus to grow embryos into fetuses and into whole pregnancies. Maybe we are looking at a future where we will ex vivo be able to raise pregnancies. What do you think about that?
Well, it's very interesting. It's a very interesting idea. And I think the whole issue of the implantation window can be retested, and maybe we can write a new chapter in the textbook. And the examination or the test of the research is very simple. You can just take, in the program of egg donation, you can take 5 days embryo and transfer to the uterus on day 3, and take 3 days embryo and transfer to the uterus on day 5, and see how many of them will implant. And I'm sure that most of them, if they are good embryo, will implant. So I think that by doing such a test, it will be very simple to know what's going on. And I'm saying this because there are so many startup companies trying to find the exact time, hour, date,
Exactly.
when to transfer the embryo, which I think is not adequate.
Yeah, I totally agree. How far apart or how wide do you think this implantation window be?
Roughly, I can say a week.
I agree here as well. I think it is much wider than generally accepted. And again, I don't want to be misunderstood. Obviously, having a uterus and having the timing right with the hormones and having the appropriate hormonal level, all of this helps, but it is not absolute. And we have a tendency in our field always to believe that things are black and white, while in biology they are always gray. There's always a range, there's always redundancy, and these rigid beliefs that an implantation window has to be 72 hours or 4 days, simply biologically, does not make any sense. Anything else you want to tell our audience?
Well, I would like to argue the stretching of the endometrium as a method to increase implantation.
Oh.
And although there is a lot of controversy in the field, I still think that injuring, stretching, or whatever you call it, will increase implantation because it will increase the inflammation within the uterus. And I think there are lots of examples in the literature how you can increase the inflammatory process in the uterus and increase implantation. And I think that one good example for this is the time that we used to do hysterosalpingogram with an oily medium, which caused some kind of chemical irritation. And it's known that following hysterosalpingogram, the implantation rate increased. And I think there are lots of examples like this. So I think that gentle scratching of the endometrium will probably increase the implantation of the embryo.
I am surprised. 2 subjects and twice we agree. And I must say I've gone through phases on this question. When scratching first came out, colleagues of yours in Israel were the first
from our institute.
Yeah, to report on it. I was actually very skeptical. But as I then saw a few more publications, we started using it, and we started using it pretty routinely. And then we got skeptical again because there were some other papers out that suggested it doesn't work. And then came Moll and his group with their big prospective study. And I actually saw him present the data even before the paper was published. And I was really surprised about those data because they showed a pretty significant effect. And so we have started doing scratching again, limited, but we are doing it again. So I once again agree.
I think the indication should be very clear for doing the scratching of the endometrium. And the only study, the original study, which is very important to mention, they did 4 times scratching of the endometrium during the luteal phase, while all the other papers tried to mimic the procedure, but they did 1, 2, depends on the time, but they didn't follow exactly the original paper, which showed a significant increase in implantation.
So 4 times
4
scratching
times during the luteal phase in the cycle before you actually do the original IVF.
And each time with a pipelle?
Each time was a pipelle.
Thank you very much, Zeev, for visiting with us. It's a pleasure having you here. And instead of 1, we had 2 subjects that we agreed about.
Thank you.
What
It's
a
a pleasure.
pleasure.
Thank you.
you.